him. Welcome back, Honors. Here with you today, coming to you, well, not live, actually, that's not necessarily true, from my home, so we can discuss actually some elements of the Jewish faith after we started talking about the ancient kingdom of Judea in class on Friday. Now, the main reason that I really want to talk about all these things is because, like I said in class the other day, it's very, very important, especially being a member of the Catholic community at Camden Catholic and also being a member of the religious community of schools, that we really give a chance to a lot of our other shared faiths out there to really give a respectful lens onto their faith, their practice, their religion, so we can better understand it to become more tolerant and respectful individuals. So, let's go ahead and talk about the Judaism and the Jewish faith. So, of course, as you know, Judaism is also known as by several different names. The people that practice it are known as the Jews, the Hebrews, the Israelites, the chosen ones, everything you want to, all of the above, really. Now, their biggest, I guess you could say, earth-shattering, very different way of thinking when it came to religion among the ancient world was the fact that their God was one, right? They were a monotheistic faith, and their God had three specific traits. He was omniscient, which means all-knowing, omnipresent, which means he exists in everywhere and everything, and omnipotent, which means that he is all-powerful, right? So, the Hebrews believed that all events in history and faith are actually interconnected, and each event reflected God's plan for the Jews. So, everybody's heard the phrase that God has a plan. This is not necessarily just a Christian concept. This is actually a concept that has existed for several thousand years. So, excuse me. This is just like a little political cartoon so you can better understand the idea of omnipresent, right? Omnipresent means that God exists everywhere. But don't forget the other two factors is omnipotent and omniscient, right? So, a couple other things about their faith. Now, due to their views, they began to actually record their laws and events in the Hebrew Bible. Now, really quickly, a lot of people will tell you that the Hebrew Bible is the Torah. That's not true, all right? The Tanakh is actually their whole collection of writings, okay? And it contains 3 books. It contains the Torah, the writings, and Numbers, I believe. So, this includes every single thing. And also, the fun fact about the Tanakh and the Torah and all of their writings as well, is they're not actually books, which is actually a very common misconception. It's a scroll. And also, it's meant to be sang more than it's meant to be spoken. So, the Torah is the one you hear about the most often, which is just one part of the Hebrew Bible, which is actually related mostly to the book of Moses. So, let's keep on going. Now, Judaism contains 24 books total, right? It comes in 3 separate parts or testaments, and the Torah is the one that we know the most commonly. It actually includes the first 5 books of the Old Testament, which is the Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Now, we talked about this in class the other day, about how there is one of these books that really, as historians, is becoming tougher and tougher to really take in at face value. Which one do you think that is again? Good job, Laura. The Exodus one. So, the more and more we dig into archaeological data and writings and things like that, there's actually less and less evidence of an exodus or ever enslavement of the Hebrew people in Egypt. Now, here's the kicker, though. Some historians believe that maybe the reason why we've never found any connection to the Hebrew people is maybe the Egyptians didn't call them Hebrews. Aha! This is where things start to get interesting. Who were the people that showed up during the second intermediate period in Egypt? Here's where all that cultural diffusion stuff just starts coming together, right? The Hyksos. What if, remember, the Egyptians depicted them as a traveling horde, but we generally believe that maybe they were just looking for somewhere to live and somewhere more fertile. Well, the actual Jewish text in the Tanakh says that the Jews left Canaan, their promised land, where they originally came about, because of a bad famine. So what if the Hyksos were actually the Hebrews, but the Egyptians just never called them Hebrew? Right? I mean, for all we know, that could be very well true. This is data that's over 3,000 years old. So maybe it did happen. Just like there's evidence to say that Noah's Ark was as probable as well. So don't give up on anything just yet, and don't ever take anything as just face value. Now, Continuing forward, though, this is the oldest text of the Jewish Tanakh, right? This is the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, it's the oldest known text of the Hebrew Bible, and it was discovered in 1947. Fun story about how it was actually discovered. So there was two young men around y'all's age. We believe they were teenagers, around 13, 14, or 15 years old, and they were herding goats, right? Well, turns out that one of the goats must have scampered away somewhere, and they were looking for it. And so they started wandering through these caves to try and find their lost goat, and one of the young men happened to pick up a rock and throw it, just messing around, as boys typically do. I mean, like, you see me in class with the football, right? He just threw this rock and then heard a shatter. They go to find like 12 clay pots full of these old papyrus scrolls right here, and it turns out to be the very, very, very oldest version of the Hebrew Bible, completely discovered on accident. They didn't even know what they had until in 1947 when an American doctor of archaeology actually figured out that that's what they were, and it became a massive discovery in the Jewish community. Now, they were written around 2,000 years ago. The reason why I say around is because we're not really positive of when they were written. They were written anywhere between 150 BC and 70 AD. So, they were written on papyrus, and they were bound in leather and also encased in clay pots. And they were found in a cave outside of the city of Qumran. Now, another really cool thing about the Dead Sea Scrolls is they contained a treasure map. That's right, a treasure map. There was actually inside of several of the pots metal castings with metal engraved Hebrew scriptures written on them that contained locations of 64 different caches of underground gold and silver. Now, we've never discovered any of them, but it's mainly because we think the Romans, when they came into the land of Judea and conquered it, that they pillaged anything they could find. Now, we'll talk more about that when we get to the Greeks and the destruction of the Parthenon, and the destruction of the statue of Athena, and things like that later on. But isn't that a shame? Literally, history did have treasure maps. How awesome is that, right? This is actually one of the caves that it was found in. This is cave number 4 in Qumran. So, as you can see, all of these little holes right here, they contained literally one of the oldest scriptures in history. It's amazing. So, continuing forward though, Judaism. Who is the father of the Israelites and the Jewish people? Does anybody know that off the top of their head? Anybody? Huh? I'm waiting. Good job, Isabel. Nice. His name is Abraham, right? Now, he and his family, according to the Bible, lived in the land of Canaan, right? Now, Canaan was in present-day Palestine / Israel. So it's on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, the Aegean Sea, over near Greece and bordering next to Turkey, Iran, Iraq, that entire Middle Eastern area. Now, Jordan, all that stuff, Lebanon. Now, after passing God's test, God made a covenant with him, or a binding agreement, right? Now, we're going to talk more about the story behind that, but I can't take up too much time because I keep this up, try to keep it under like 10 minutes. But there's actually a crazy awesome story about Abraham and how literally Islam and Judaism are like really interconnected through like the people that Abraham birthed, his 2 sons, Isaiah and Ishmael. Or Isaac and Ishmael. Now, anyway, so let's keep going real quick because we bang this out and we can kind of make it a little short of your weekend, right? Now, God's covenant with the Israelites is a really, really important concept, like I was just saying. After Abraham passed God's test, he made a covenant with him. Well, let's talk about what a covenant is really quick. So, a covenant is a promise or a binding agreement, right? The covenant between God and the Hebrews was 2 parts. And the 2 parts were a special relationship between God and the Israelites, deeming them known as the chosen people, right? So, also, the promised land in Canaan, which is home to modern-day Israel. The effect of the Zionism movement, which we will talk about later on, much later in the course when we talk about World War I, and the displacement of the Jewish people throughout history, right? So, the promised land in Canaan, and a special relationship between God as their chosen people, right? Now, key differences, though, to Judaism and Catholicism that we can talk about real quick, or Christianity in general, is the fact that first and foremost, there is no hell in Judaism, right? So, in Judaism, they don't believe in a punishment for sin and wrongdoings. They actually believe in the concept of almost a purgatory-like state, which a lot of people refer to as like God's magic like laundry machine, where literally your soul is cleansed of its sin and wrongdoings, which is actually really, really cool. It's called something, but I can't remember what it is. I'm going to look it up and I'll tell you in class on Monday. Now, they also believe that they should not ever try to spread their religion. They believe that their faith will draw people in naturally should they feel to become one with God in the covenant. Now, lastly, they also believe that their God was compassionate and not a threat. Now, this differs a lot with early Christian ideals of God. You know, when we talk about the kind of wrathful God. Have you ever heard the phrase God-fearing people? Well, the early Christians believed that God was one to be feared because of his wrath, where actually the Jews believe that he is one that is compassionate beyond all belief, which is what we as Christians today believe in with the union of Christ, the Holy Spirit, and God himself, right? Or the Father. So we believe that that compassionate God actually exists today. So it's a lot of different standards. Now, next couple of things. The Ten Commandments, right? This is a story that a lot of you know a lot about. This eventually actually evolved into Jewish law. Now, can you name all of the Ten Commandments? We'll see what you got on Monday. All right. So anyway, now, the Jews believe that high morals led to salvation, whereas other, like Eastern religions, did not necessarily believe in a code of conduct, right? So the Jews believe that, honestly, that living your daily life is what's going to elevate you into the next phase. Now, ironically enough, many other Eastern religions didn't believe in this, but there was one that did, and it actually does with the caste system. Hindus believe in a high moral code of conduct, which actually elevates you throughout your ranks of reincarnation. So we'll talk more about that on Monday as well. Now, daily conduct and lives of Hebrews. These are a couple of little sketchy things about ancient Jews. They don't do this anymore, all right? Like, this was a very ancient kingdom of Judea kind of thing, and a lot of it has to do with self-preservation of its people, and it seems really dicey, but it's actually not as bad as you think it is. Now, first and foremost, let's talk about the fact that Jews condemn adultery from women, right? Literally, women could be brought to death in the early Jewish community if they stepped out on their husbands. But ironically enough, men were allowed to go and hook up with concubines, slaves, and servants if they chose. Now, some people believe that this is mainly to do to the furtherment of more Jewish babies, makes more Jewish practicers. Now, again, this is an ancient Jewish belief, right? This is very, very old school. This is very back in the day. Now, women could also not divorce their husbands in early Judaic faith, and also marriages were arranged in early Judaic faith. Now, none of these happen anymore, but the biggest one that actually was very unique to Jewish law in the ancient kingdom of Judea is the brother law, right? The brother law is this idea that if a woman never gave birth to children under her husband, and her husband actually died tragically, that she was forced to go and marry the brother of her husband if he was alive. That would actually make it so they could actually sire children. And the requirement was to try and put memory onto the man who died, the husband that died. The very first son that was born would be named after the father that passed away. So early on, though, a lot of people believe that this was to betterment of the widow, because the widows were actually viewed as kind of lesser people, such as orphans and the homeless, under the Jewish faith. So by taking the widow and then having her be married into the family and stay with the family, have a brand new family, that actually she would be more safe from public scrutiny. So again, remember, values were very different in ancient times. So we don't look at them through a lens of like these people were terrible, because that's not the case. A lot of it has to do with the self-preservement of their faith and also their people. So last couple of things. Women were educated children at home under ancient Judaism. They traded with the Phoenicians a lot because each Jewish family actually specialized in a craft. Every single Jewish family was a special artisan. So for example, this actually carried over into their community, and it still kind of exists today. That's why you have a lot of Jewish families who are still jewelers, lawyers, doctors, a lot of very more like skilled positions, right? So a lot of the ancient faith, or the ancient kingdom of Judea, a lot of them were cobblers or blacksmiths or jewelers or metallurgists or alchemists, like a lot of different stuff. So each family specialized in a craft, and then they took that craft early on, and that was their form of currency because money didn't exist yet. So dietary restrictions also arose on how to properly slaughter and process meat, and that developed into the idea of the kosher diet. Now, what I want you to do, maybe for a little extra credit, because if you're not muting me, you'll hear this, look up an element of the kosher diet and bring it into class on Monday, and I'll give you a couple extra points in your next quiz, all right? So that is going to be all that we're going to talk about this evening. I hope you really enjoyed it, because I love talking about other faiths, and if they gave me a chance at Camden Catholic, I would totally teach a world religions class. But I really hope you learned a little something about another faith that exists out there in the world, and we're going to talk more about this on Monday, and about how their faith and their practices led forward. But we're also going to pick up with the Assyrians on Monday, which is one of my favorite people to talk about. So This is kind of a glimpse into the ancient Judaic people and how they lived their lives and where they came from and their belief systems. And that's going to be it for the week.